What if history had taken a different turn? What if Baldwin IV, the leper king of Jerusalem, had lived beyond his youth marked by leprosy? What would have happened to the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem if its most determined and strategic sovereign had reigned for 2 more decades? In this video, we'll explore a fascinating possibility. What would a medieval Middle East look like with Baldwin IV on the throne into adulthood? This is not merely an exercise in imagination, but a serious investigation based on historical records, real political decisions, and the resolve with which Baldwin faced Saladin and even the nobles of his own court. His early death at 23 years old left a leadership vacuum that paved the way for the disaster of Hatin and the fall of Jerusalem. But what if it hadn't been that way? Stay with us until the end to discover how a single prolonged life could have changed the fate of an entire kingdom and perhaps of all Christendom in the Holy Land. Get ready for a dive into the history that almost was, but that still teaches us much about courage, politics, and faith. In the 12th century, the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem was a Christian enclave surrounded by expanding Muslim powers. Founded after the First Crusade, the kingdom maintained precarious control over the Holy Land thanks to fragile alliances, Western knights, and military orders like the Templars and Hospitallers. Meanwhile, in the Islamic world, a unifying figure was emerging: Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria, who gathered under his banner the ideal of jihad against the Crusaders. It was a time of instability, delicate diplomacy, and nearly constant wars. And on this chessboard arose Baldwin, an unlikely king. Let us imagine that, through a rare combination of effective palliative treatments and individual resilience, Baldwin managed to keep his health stable after the year 1185. Instead of succumbing to leprosy at 23 years old, the king remains on the throne for another decade. The impact would be immediate and profound, both within Jerusalem and in the balance of power with Saladin. The first visible change would be political. By maintaining direct control over the government, Baldwin would prevent the rise of the Count of Tripoli as absolute regent and would definitively block the ambitions of Guy of Lusignan, whose reckless leadership would, in historical reality, lead to the disaster of Hatin. Baldwin, though young and ill, was an experienced strategist, respected by the barons and the military orders. Under his command, impulsive decisions, such as leading the army to meet Saladin under disadvantageous conditions, would likely have been avoided. Moreover, Baldwin had demonstrated an impressive ability to contain Saladin through astute alliances. He had managed, for example, to strike agreements with Muslim factions hostile to the Sultan, such as the Assassins and the Atabegs of Aleppo. With more time to live, he would have had the chance to deepen this diplomacy, keeping Saladin occupied on multiple fronts and weakened in his campaigns against the Crusaders. In the military field, Baldwin had already demonstrated strategic skill at Montgisard, where, with a much smaller army, he defeated Saladin in 1177. With time and support from the European Crusader kingdoms, the king could have reorganized his forces, reinforced key fortresses like Kerak and Belvoir, and even led counterattacks to secure supply routes and access to the sea. Another essential point would be succession. With more time to live, Baldwin could have ensured a stable transition, perhaps by marrying his sister Sibylla to a more competent political ally than Guy of Lusignan, or even by more firmly promoting his nephew Baldwin V, with support from internal factions. By avoiding succession disputes, the kingdom would gain the stability needed to resist Muslim offensives. In reality, it was Baldwin's early death that paved the way for instability, the disastrous rise of Guy, and ultimately, the catastrophic defeat at Hatin in 1187, where the Christian military elite was annihilated and the very relic of the true cross was captured. In an alternate scenario, with Baldwin alive, That battle would never have occurred under the same conditions, or might have been avoided altogether. The king, aware of his force's limitations and the importance of defending Jerusalem prudently, would likely have chosen the right terrain and moment to confront Saladin, just as he did at Montgisard. With Baldwin's survival, the Kingdom of Jerusalem would have had more time to adapt, strengthen ties with the West, and perhaps even deter a full-scale offensive from Saladin. The Third Crusade, which happened only because of the loss of Jerusalem, might not have even been necessary. With Baldwin still on the throne during the decade from 1185 to 1195, the Kingdom of Jerusalem would have consolidated as a more stable monarchy, centered on a sober king respected for his faith and his firmness in the face of illness. The very image of the Leper King could have become a lasting symbol of Christian resistance and virtue, echoing as an example for the Knights of Europe. Politically, the continuity of his rule would have prevented the internal fragmentation that precipitated the defeat at Hatin. Baldwin possessed enough moral authority to balance the rivalries between nobles like Raymond III of Tripoli, the Ibelin brothers, and Queen Sibylla. His actual death triggered disputes over the throne. His survival would have allowed for a more rational transition, perhaps with the appointment of an heir based on merit and not merely dynastic ties. Another crucial factor would be the effect on Saladin himself. With a competent political and military opponent on the throne of Jerusalem, Saladin would have faced more obstacles in his campaign for Muslim unification. In reality, Saladin always respected Baldwin and feared his strategic intelligence. The continued existence of this king could have forced the Sultan to redirect his efforts to consolidate his internal territories instead of investing in an all-out war against the Crusaders. Furthermore, the prolongation of Baldwin's reign would have had direct effects on relations with European powers. Kings like Henry II of England and Philip II of France maintained interest in the Holy Land, but their decisions to commit militarily only became urgent after the loss of Jerusalem. With Baldwin still alive and Jerusalem under Christian control, it's possible that Western support would have come in the form of gradual and planned reinforcements rather than massive and desperate crusades. In the spiritual realm, the impact would also have been profound. The maintenance of the Holy City in Crusader hands under the leadership of a virtuous and suffering king would have been interpreted as a sign of divine providence. Chroniclers like William of Tyre, who already saw Baldwin as an almost messianic figure, would have reinforced that image. Popular faith could have been renewed, feeding the Crusader ideal with hope rather than the trauma of loss. From the perspective of the military orders, both Templars and Hospitallers would have strengthened their presence, benefiting from Baldwin's firm leadership. Instead of becoming divided among rival factions, as happened after his death, they might have collaborated more strategically, expanding fortresses along the Jordan and the Eastern Desert, making Muslim incursions more difficult. It's even possible to envision a more lasting peace treaty. With Jerusalem intact and Saladin pressured on multiple fronts, both sides might have been led to negotiate a prolonged truce. A cohabitation agreement, like the one Richard the Lionheart later tried to establish, might have arisen under more favorable conditions. Of course, all this remains in the realm of speculation, but grounded in concrete historical evidence. Baldwin was a king with vision, courage, and leadership ability. Unlike many of his successors, he did not seek personal glory, but rather the survival of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. His longevity could have delayed or even prevented the Crusader collapse, changing not only the fate of the Holy Land, but perhaps the very course of the Crusades. The story of Baldwin, the Leper King, is already extraordinary in itself. A young man who, even condemned by an incurable disease, led with wisdom and bravery a kingdom surrounded by enemies and internal intrigues. But imagining what could have been if he had lived longer is more than a what-if exercise. It's a way of recognizing how much honest, strategic, and courageous leadership can alter the destiny of a people. Perhaps Jerusalem would not have fallen. Perhaps East and West might have coexisted more evenly for longer. And perhaps Baldwin's figure would have become even more venerated, as a saint, as a hero, or as a martyr of a kingdom that for a brief moment shone with rare dignity. If you enjoyed this journey through what almost was, don't forget to like the video, leave your comment saying what you think would have changed with Baldwin's survival, and of course, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. The Middle Ages are full of untaken paths. Shall we explore them together?